Joining us now is retired Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and MSNBC Chief International Analyst. So first, about the Dalai Lama. As you know, this is always a hot-button issue with Beijing. And there was certainly a lot of fallout after Speaker Emerita Pelosi, then Speaker Pelosi, a couple of years ago, went to Taiwan. Also, McCall followed up this year with a bipartisan visit to Taiwan, with Beijing reacting. How serious is this, and do you think that this visit with the Dalai Lama will provoke China? Was it a good thing to do or ill-considered?
I think it was a good thing to do, and I want to draw a line under a word you said, which we don't use often enough: bipartisan. And to see a former speaker and a current chair of one of the most important committees from two opposite parties make a commitment to the culture, the history, the real idea of Tibet is incredibly important to me. It's very similar to what we have done with Taiwan. And yes, Andrea, it will set off alarm bells in Beijing. But let's face it, it's not just Tibet, it's Taiwan, it's cyber, it is human rights violations in China, it's trade and tariff disagreements, it's territorial claims in the South China Sea. We have a pretty rich basket of disagreements with the Chinese Communist Party, and this is going to add to the tension.
And speaking of tension, exactly what you have been warning against in the increasingly alarmingly aggressive action of China towards the Philippines is this incident in the South China Sea, where a Philippine sailor was severely injured. There was a collision between ships from China and the Philippines, both sides blaming each other. The U.S. is bound, of course, by treaty to help defend the Philippines. So where does this go from here?
Just for everybody's general awareness, the South China Sea is huge. It's half the size of the continental United States. 40% of the world's trade passes through it. It's full of oil and gas at the bottom of the South China Sea. China claims all of it, an area half the size of the United States, as territorial waters. The nations around the South China Sea, to include the Philippines, are pushing back, and they should do so. And this particular incident, a collision of two military warships, ought to get everybody's attention in terms of how this is ratcheting up. And final point here, Andrea, as you mentioned, we are bound by treaty to defend the Philippines. It's a mutual defense treaty, just like we have with 32 nations in NATO, as we have with Japan, South Korea, Australia. It's a very significant commitment. So when one of our treaty allies is banging heads pretty significantly, and I think on the right side of the issue with China, we ought to pay close attention.
And speaking of the Far East, you've got Vladimir Putin in North Korea. We've got less than a minute, but how concerning are you about the military support for Vladimir Putin from Kim Jong-un?
I'm very concerned, and I add it to the kind of second-tier support. It's a little surreptitious, but that's coming from China, and Iran is also assisting Russia. So here you see Russia, North Korea, Iran, China kind of in the shadows. It's an authoritarian coalition. It's spearheaded by Putin and his invasion in Ukraine. We ought to call it out. It's inappropriate for North Korea to do this, and shame on Russia for turning to a sanctioned regime like North Korea.